Grace and Steele. I'm Kevin Steele. This show, my co-host, Kevin Michael Grace, will be speaking with our guest, Dennis Dale. We're subtitling this episode Working Class Hero because Mr. Dale is working class. And he's a hero with a Twitter account, a blog, and cell phone video. More important, he lives in Portland, and he's on the AltRight. That's pretty heroic. This discussion is in two parts. Part one is the interview with Mr. Dale. He talks about his background, his upbringing, his work life, and how he came to the AltRight. Kevin and him speak about the inner cities and race relations. Kevin and Dennis have known each other for a few years, so you'll notice some familiarity in their back and forth. This interview was recorded the day before the presidential election, and we intended to release it just after our gloating episode. But then Mr. Dale started going down to the Portland protests following Donald Trump's presidential victory, and he was covering those, so we held off for a bit. Then these turned into riots, and then Dennis got arrested, along with 70-odd protesters. So naturally, we had to hear how that turned out, which delayed things further. In part two, which is episode 63, he'll tell us about that experience. But first, let's get the background.
Dennis, I like to begin by asking people how they got to the alt-right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing?
Well, I'm a working class white kid from Norwalk, California, which is the lower southeastern corner of LA County. Very humble origins. My mother was a secretary in Downey. She worked at in the old, now defunct and now long gone aerospace industry that used to be down there.
So anyway, sorry to interrupt. We have two generations of military industrial complex in your family, then.
Yeah,
but I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So anyway, that was my upbringing. I was a bit of a delinquent. I mean, it was really standard 70s, early 80s upbringing. Somewhat idyllic in my memory now, but you know. Anyway, so that's where I came from. I joined the military. Came back home.
You were in the Marines for 5 years, weren't you?
4 years, yeah.
4 years, and what did you do in the Marines, and where were you stationed?
I was just a helicopter mechanic, so you know, if people want to think I'm a commando, I let them. But I was in what they call the air wing. Worked on Hueys and Cobras, and I went to Camp Pendleton, which wasn't far from home, which probably wasn't good. Looking back, I think I'd be better off to go farther away, but. You know, we would fly over to Japan, Korea, Philippines. What they call the West Pac, the Western Pacific deployment. It's pretty uneventful, actually. You know, then I came out. I worked in the aerospace industry back home.
Let me interrupt you and ask you, why did you leave the Marines after 4 years? Was that 1 or 2 terms of duty?
That's one. You could go in at the time. You could go in for 3. And what they call an open contract, they give you whatever. You end up a grunt. Or you could go in for 4 and they'll give you some sort of cool job, you know. And so I went in for 4 to do aerospace, do aviation, and there was never any plan of staying. It was just, I was a short timer, and a lot of us, we just, there was never any intention to re-enlist, you know, never any thought of that.
You didn't go to college?
No, I'm a high school dropout.
So after you left the Marines, you got into the aerospace industry?
Well, I was just a mechanic, yeah. So I bounced around Long Beach, California. There used to be McDonnell Douglas. They got swallowed up by Boeing. And in fact, I ended up in 96 coming up here to the Northwest to go to work for Boeing. But I'm not there anymore.
Well, why don't you talk about that? Why don't you talk about the dismantling of the military that took place in the 90s?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, once I got out, I didn't follow much. I had I didn't look back. But in the early 90s, they started cutting away. Remember, I wanted to say Weinberger, but it was somebody else and Clinton's crew who was tasked with cutting away all this extra. So I was running into people who, this is like 91, 92, I'd already been out 3 or 4 years. And I was running into guys who were these were lifers. These are guys who wanted a real enlistment, do 20, who were getting booted out after 11 or 12 years. But it does seem of a part with the consolidation. Like I said, my mother worked as a secretary, and this is a job I don't know anybody could get now. I mean, she had, just her high school education. She was a single mom with 5 kids when that was, it wasn't considered shameful so much. The impression I remember was that we were just this tragic case. It was kind of annoying, right? The other neighbors, we were a broken home, and people actually used the phrase back then. And we were very much broken. But anyway, my mom managed to take care of 5 kids all by herself, working as a secretary in the NASA complex in Downey, all through the Apollo program. It was awesome. As kids, we used to go down there and tour every time they brought back the capsules from the moon, we would go and take the tour and get to, climb around and all the stuff that came back. It's pretty incredible. And of course, it's gone now. It was North American Rockwell, then it was North American. Now it's Boeing, but the actual NASA, the actual building in Downey, they don't know what to do with it. In fact, I thought it was pretty almost poetic that one of the things they tried to do was make a movie studio out of it. There in Doughty, old Downey. If you know anything about Southern California, and you know Downey, Downey it's got such a dowdy image that it even made a Curb Your Enthusiasm joke. I think Larry at one point is stuck in a room full of, to him, boring goyim, and somebody's droning on about Downey or something. But anyway.
Well, so the way that people in Seattle talk about, what is it, Ballard or Burien?
Ballard, which is an awesome place. Right. Ballard, which is, seems to me to be a great place to live. Yeah, I don't know. They're trying to make it into Jersey. But that's kind of ironic, too. I mean, I think they like Ballard. Norwalk, Downey, that little corner of LA County is just, people outside of it think of it as some sort of ghetto, but it's really more boring than anything else. That was I recall.
So when did you move to Seattle?
96.
And
20 years.
What kind of work were you doing?
I went to Boeing. I was just a mechanic on the line. We were the guys who actually joined together the big, these airplanes, they come down the assembly line in big barrel sections, and you attach them together with big giant drills and rivet guns and stuff. So anyway, it's all pretty boring, but that's what we did. It was pretty cool. I remember liking it.
How was the pay?
What?
How was the pay?
And the pay is not good enough. It wasn't, you were mid-range, working class guy, taking one of these jobs. And there is opportunity in there for guys who have a little gumption. But here was my experience at Boeing. I was there for almost 4 years. When I got there, in fact, I was part of this wave of bodies they were throwing at their problems, trying to get the planes out. In aviation, they always sell the planes faster than they can make them. So,
which planes were they pushing at that point?
It was the 777. It's one of their newer planes. And of course, that's the one I built. That was a new plane when I got there. So anyway, it was all so labor intensive, right? And during that period when I was there, I just watched them shave that labor down till at the end they were laying us off.
When was Boeing bought by McDonnell Douglas?
Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas right after I got up here. I think 96
and
or 97.
And they moved all the executive jobs to St. Louis, didn't they?
Eventually, yeah. Or was it Chicago? I think I was already gone. I already left Boeing when that happened.
Well, the story that I heard is that they told all the management at Boeing that you're moving to St. Louis, but Boeing is Seattle, and we've been in Seattle our whole lives, and This is our community, and our family and friends are here. Do you want jobs or do you not want jobs?
Take it or leave it. Yeah. And it's such I mean, Bill Boeing is an amazing guy. He started out in lumber, and, people were building airplanes, shortly after the Wright brothers. And he was this go-getter. He thought, yeah, I'll give that a try. And he built his own plane, and he started a mail service. I think the first thing he started doing was ferrying mail, like to Alaska or something out of Seattle. I forget, but an amazing story. I guess all these amazing American stories, eventually they just get swiped, sucked up into the globalist miasma and forgotten,
So were you laid off from Boeing in 2000?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Was this, you mentioned a lot of other layoffs, so there were a lot of people that went with you?
Yeah, I mean, they were getting pretty bad. Yeah, when I left, what was it? I don't even remember, 2000, yeah. They were hacking away pretty deep by that time because I'd been there for 3 years. But, that's what happens. That's the nature of that business.
Well, let me ask you this question. When you did your 4 years in the armed forces, and then you got into the military-industrial complex, at that time, did you think, okay, I'm set for life. There's always going to be this kind of work for me for as long as I want to do it?
No. And, it's not my nature, I probably should be more like that, but really, I mean, I was just shuffling along, taking the job. I didn't really want to do that.
You're one of these 70 slackers, are you?
I really was. Really aimless. And you came out of if you're like me, you come out of my time and place very much like this. Not to I don't blame environment, but anyway, I wasn't thinking that. And more importantly, I think they weren't giving you that expectation, really. You know what I mean? You go into this business, the old timers tell you, you're probably going to get laid off at some point. And they do. I think the businesses did for a time try to, sort of flatten out that cycle. And Boeing made a big deal out of it. They never managed to do it. They can't help it. What's going to happen eventually is these jobs are going to be so less labor intensive that it's not going to be a big deal because they're not going to be hiring waves of people in the first place,
When you were at Boeing, did you hear people talking about the government subsidized competition from Europe?
Yes, it was a big issue, right? Boeing was raising it with Airbus, but I don't recall whatever became of that. In fact, I don't even know where they rank now. Is Airbus number one now?
Well, no, I guess the idea was people thought that the government of the United States was going to stand up for its own airline industries, and it never really turned out that way.
Right.
So where did you go after you left Boeing?
Oh, I went to work for a place called B.F. Goodrich. They don't make tires, and they work on airplanes. And so I went right across the street, basically, to a place called B.F. Goodrich Aerospace, which we do the heavy checks on these airplanes. Keep in mind, I'm still in a job in an industry that I don't really like. And I'm not really, I jokingly call myself the world's worst mechanic, but it's not quite that bad. But anyway, so I went there and I did that and here's another place where it's all offsourcing is happening. And you're in there working with people who are on short-term contracts, They come and go, and, you can see them trying to go towards temps, basically, right? They pay you a better wage, but you don't get any, they don't have all these overhead costs of health insurance and all that other nonsense.
And there's no sense of obligation.
None. McDonnell Douglas was one culture. They tried mightily to inculcate, us guys on the working class side we share some blame, I was in the UAW at McDonnell Douglas. And I was always thoroughly unimpressed with the union guys. And I always thought that the problem with unions is, you're a bunch of uneducated guys over on this side dealing with management on the other side. And their whole job is this, right? This negotiation business. So you get a little fed up with those guys. But I don't know. They tried to install, they tried to inculcate, they tried to bring in this Japanese management stuff at some point, right? None of it worked because we were resistant too, but also, we kind of knew it was bullshit that when the shit hits the fan, they're going to start massive layoffs, Boeing then again, when I got to Boeing, I heard more talk about we're going to flatten out this horrible cycle where we hire and a bunch of people get laid off. Obviously that's not working. Like I said, what's going to happen is it's just going to be these factories are going to be so automated and there are going to be a few highly trained technicians running them. And it's not going to be a problem with people coming in waves. In fact, I think this Elon Musk guy is probably right. And this is something I've actually been thinking of myself, is that in the future, everything's going to be so automated that they're just going to have to give people this little basic income, right, to keep them from, I don't know.
Well, that's assuming that people would put up with this regime. But I'm just looking at the cost of the Boeing 777. It's around $300 million a plane.
Right.
Now, did it occur to people there that when you have airplane accidents that result because of some $5 part not being installed correctly, or someone forgot to install it, and then maybe it's not such a good idea to have temps working on this equipment?
Right. And the long-term employee, he's got, somebody actually said to me, and it's like half joking, I was younger back then, this was an older guy, and we were talking about some safety issue and some mechanical thing, and he said something, well, it doesn't matter. By the time this part fails, I'm probably going to be dead. So, they're not going to catch me. You come across this stuff sometime. It's kind of chilling. Also, at McDonnell Douglas, we had an awful lot of affirmative action hires. So we had an awful lot of folks from nearby Compton and South Central who weren't particularly diligent people,
Well, you were in the UAW, you said. And
Yeah.
I wonder if the level of disaffection was anywhere near it was famously in Detroit, Windsor. One of my uncles was a manager for Chrysler in Windsor. And he told these incredible stories of guys welding beer cans to the inside of fenders. And there'd be a car going down the line and someone had set it on fire. Oh, who did this? Oh, nobody knows. It wasn't as bad as that, was it?
No, in fact, I was going to say, I have this weird charmed life. I seem to avoid all these sort of upheavals. So when I got to McDonnell Douglas, it was all pretty quiet. We had 1 or 2 contract negotiations during the time I was there, and it's always the same thing, right? Everybody digs their heels in on each side, and these union guys just start making a lot of noise about, we're getting screwed. And the company does try to, tries to negotiate back, claw back whatever they can in negotiations. So anyway, it's all hype and bluster. But like I said, it was all pretty mellow. We never went on strike. Then I went to Boeing. I think we had one during my time there, relatively mild, but you would always hear these stories like what you were saying about those guys, stories of people doing, just awful things, and especially with airplanes. You shouldn't be screwing around, obviously, but doing things like sabotaging work, going in there and just cutting wires, stuff that's going to be found. It's going to cost them a ton of money. It doesn't necessarily, they're going to send an airplane out like that, but it's, again, if you've inculcated a sort of sense of obligation because people have a connection to that company, obviously shit like this won't happen.
But you never came across this ethos of the dignity of labor.
Yeah, I've been cured of that myself over time. I don't know. There's no easy way there's no kind way to describe my experience. Say at McDonnell Douglas, we all became, there were the guys like me. There were these basic working class white dudes who don't have a lot of options out there. And we'd go there and we'd take our jobs seriously and we did them. And there were a lot of other people who didn't. And the, sort of demographic compositions are exactly what you would think.
No, well, you mentioned affirmative action. I'm curious about this. Did a fair number of these affirmative action hires make it known that, you can't get rid of us? You need us to meet mandates or something like that?
No. And I say, no. And I say they're affirmative action hires because nobody knows they're an affirmative action hire. It's just the company has, decided they're going to employ X amount. So nobody's, And there's none of that attitude. It's just, it was simply too easy to get away with slacking then. So I have some sympathy for the company, obviously, but it's just, I talked to one guy. This was a white guy. It was a horrible slacker. And I remember him telling me, I come to work to socialize, and you would see these people, they'd come in and they would just sort of cruise around and they would drop in on their friends who were working on the airplane and chat. And then off they'd go. I don't know how people got away with it, but
So, get us up to date here on when did you sort of bottom out of the mechanic business?
around 2005, I think. Wow, it's been forever. It was about the time I started blogging. I think I started blogging when I was out of work, but and I haven't gone back, so I've just been bouncing around since. But,
what kind of jobs have you been doing since then?
Driving a truck. Mostly, I've been a couple of different places, and that's where I am at now.
Doing deliveries?
Yeah, I drive a fish truck, which is actually okay, but
you used to deliver newspapers at one time, did you?
I did that in the mornings. For a while, I was delivering papers in the morning and pizza at night, and sleeping, wherever I could. In fact, I was trying a big push to, because I didn't get laid off from the third place. I just left in disgust because they were going to stick me on a shift I couldn't work. I was a single dad at the time, so I said, okay, screw it. And that's when I ended up doing, like newspapers and pizza and everything I could. But anyway, I just kind of gave up on aviation at that point.
Did you have the experience? I know I did. That when I was no longer working regularly, at a fairly decent job. I mean, I quit the University of BC after 12 years when I was 30 years old, because I thought I don't want to be surrounded by these people the rest of my life. Their intellectual pretensions are driving me crazy. Also, this weird sense of ambition. But then I found myself in a position where, oh my God, I've become one of those people.
Right.
I wake up in the morning and think, how am I going to make it till the end of the month? Did you find yourself going through that kind of experience?
Yeah. My problem is I always feel alienated from these people. I've always felt out of place. I really had no business. I joined the service on a whim, and I got sent into this field, almost randomly. It wasn't like it was something to which I was, something I had extra interest in, or something to which I was inclined, So and then I've just sort of drifted through all this, and the whole time I've been, your experience was with a lot of pretentious, educated people, right?
They were nowhere near as educated as they thought they were. That was one of the big problems.
Yeah. And over here, it's hard for me to say this without sounding like an asshole, but there's not enough guys are into stuff, like we're into. No, not enough people read or know about, things beyond. But you meet these great guys in the service too. These kind of kindred spirits, we're all over out here. These white guys like me who, we're mostly aimless, but we're not stupid people, and we're not incapable either. And we see what's going on, around us. But yeah, I was always impressed. In fact, I was most impressed, I think, by the sailors. I spent a couple of months in Pensacola. The image you have in the Marine Corps is that, we're tight and the sailors are all loose and undisciplined. So I went to a Navy school, aircrew school in Pensacola, Florida, with sailors. But I was thoroughly impressed. And it is this type that they're trying to drum out of society, by the way. This white working class guy who doesn't have an education. He's of average or slightly above average intelligence, but he's a good guy. He takes his job seriously. This is what I was so impressed with, because I didn't, I realized I didn't take my own job seriously. I'd see these guys, and they're all different sorts of technicians. You go there to learn water survival and crap for flying. And they all had an admirable commitment to their jobs,
Well, aren't these people we're talking about, weren't they formally considered the backbone of the American Armed Forces?
Right. And, we've discredited that backbone, but we haven't replaced it, have we?
I mean, I've seen the pictures. You've seen the pictures of these smiling women who are, if they're not, overweight, they're 5 feet tall and weigh 100 pounds.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I don't really see this working somehow.
Yeah, and they're bound and determined, right? I think they got one woman through an infantry training course somewhere. And what's really distressing is the Marine Corps seems to be gung-ho out front.
Well, they seem to be, they're so keen to get them into the Rangers and to Special Forces.
Yeah.
And into reconnaissance Marines and all this, the elite units, and it's not working at all.
Right. So what they're doing is they're bending the system. They're drawing away all these resources to try and will into reality what this thing we've been telling ourselves, right? We've had 20, 30 years of television shows where there are these, androgynous superheroes, these badass babes running around kicking ass. So we're trying to will that into reality, and it's just not there, is it?
Well, no. I mean, you think of the story about boot camp, that you get sent on this hike with a 50-pound pack or whatever, right. And you just think, no, I'm going to die. I can't make this. And you look around, and well, no one else is quitting, so you think, right. Well, I guess I can't quit. I simply don't see this as a female characteristic.
Right. Well, that's an excellent point. And I always flash back to this great quote from Camille Paglia, however you say it. This nonsense about how women are better cooperators is absurd. Men have been cooperating in war, in hunting teams, in all of these endeavors from the beginning of time. The fact of the matter is, cooperation, it kind of is born in war and these other things.
Yeah, sure. Let's make these foxholes work. Whereas the female attitude is, why are we in foxholes?
Right. And there's all kinds of problems, obviously, and maybe the worst is that people are just going to be out there having sex. Especially, think about that. In that situation, you might die. There you are. There's a woman. You're a man. All right, we might as well have sex now, But it's a huge problem. I remember reading something somewhere. A Navy officer complained about women on his ship. He said, "I've had knife fights over women on the ship." It's a problem, but...
Well, I hear this extraordinary cynicism amongst male soldiers talking about the females. I mean, sexually, I was told by someone whose son was in the Marines until fairly recently in the biggest base in Afghanistan.
Right.
That they have a rule that the women there are not allowed to walk out at night. And it's partly because of the bad guys, but it's partly because of their own guys.
Right.
They trust them that little in those circumstances. Yeah. But let's move on to something a little different. Were you raised as a Catholic?
I was.
You went to Catholic school?
I went to catechism. Yeah, did all that. I was awful about it. My mother was a good Catholic. She tried mightily to keep us. We were in it was the 70s, and our neighborhood was pretty much destroyed. People in LA, well, I forget the freeway. I don't even remember that. A freeway tore our neighborhood in half, just ahead of the time that new sort of drugs started appearing. What was the one that was everywhere? Anyway, the situation was a mess. And this is what my mother, every Saturday would come grab me and drag me off, But I'm afraid it didn't take.
It was pretty diluted Catholic Church by that point. I remember my nieces and nephews, who were several years younger than me. I remember being appalled. I guess I was about 15 years old. I was visiting them, and they came back from school. One of them came back from school, Catholic school, and was raving about how they were singing that Ray Stevens song, "Everything is Beautiful," during theology class.
Right. Yeah, it was very much 70s aesthetic when I got there. You know what I mean? It was kind of hippie. I remember at the time, sometime in the late 70s, early 80s, when this born-again craze hit, right? It was the hippies who had taken it up, And I think, like the established churches, adopted little hippie aesthetics here and there, the guy with the guitar.
Oh, sure, the guitar masses and all that. This Pentecostalism, it had this wave of popularity in the Catholic Church, beginning, I guess, in the mid-'70s and lasting for about a decade. I remember going to Mass at noon at St. Mark's, which is the chapel at UBC, in this small church. And they were already doing this nonsense with people linking hands during the Our Father.
Right.
And the fellow, 2 people away from me, he started thrashing around wildly, and, gibberish was coming from his mouth.
Oh, God,
and I was just stunned. And I turned to the woman next to me and said, "Is he having a seizure?" And she said, "No, he's Pentecostal."
Yeah. No, this was in a Catholic church?
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah. But so you drifted away from it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, I wish you hadn't asked me. I know you're Catholic, and I just hate myself, but there wasn't a moment where I took it seriously. And after my confirmation, I never went back, One thing I'll say you talked about the experience you had at your church. We had, our church was St. John of God in Norwalk, a large Mexican element there. So it was a little bit actually more traditional, I think. I give credit to the Mexicans in that, things are kept more somber and.
Did you have the old
strict.
ladies with who are still covering their heads?
Sure, yeah, and the great lacy black veils.
They're called
and stuff.
mantillas.
Yeah, see, it's so awful. Here's my real shame is that, so I went through that. I was raised Catholic, and here I am, even now, terms will pop up that I'm supposed to know about Catholicism, that I don't know, right? And I think to myself, I don't know. I just think it's shameful, but there it is.
Well, I mean, the church has done a terrible job of educating children in the faith for decades now. So your experience is not unusual in the slightest. One of the reasons I brought this up is because I've noticed that a great many people on the alt-right, contrary to what others would think, are religious, and a great many of them are, in fact, traditionalists, and a great many of them are traditionalist Catholics.
I would put myself as a traditionalist, and, my feeling right now is full-bore reaction, If it was at all possible, we should drag ourselves back into a version of Christendom pre-Vatican,
Pre-Vatican II.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about how you got woke. Looking back at my own experience, now I mentioned I was a Catholic and I was raised by these liberal nuns. And they had us singing Negro spirituals in school. And we just thought that the plight of the blacks in the United States was appalling. And how can people be like this? What's wrong with them? I'll tell you a story you might find amusing. That there was this old tradition in Catholic schools where the children would bring in spare change, pennies, nickels, dimes. Right. And when you had collected enough money, and it wasn't all that much, you had enough to baptize a heathen in Africa. Right. And so our class in the 2nd or 3rd grade, we had enough money. And in the spirit of the day, the democratic spirit, the nun asked us, well, you get to name this boy who's going to become a Catholic. What do you want to call him? So we voted to call him John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I think that poor guy, I wonder how he turned out.
There's probably a bunch of JFKs out there, right? Everybody was inspired at the time. Right?
Yeah, well, these Mugabe and Joseph Mobutu were both mission boys.
Oh, really?
Yes, and they didn't turn out too well.
Oh, it doesn't work, right? I mean, Idi Amin was in the Scottish Guards or something, right? Yeah.
Well, my own experience in getting woke, looking back, is that it began with the O.J. Simpson trial.
Yeah.
That the unreality of this and everyone pretending that things aren't as they are. I mean, they can see the truth in front of them, and especially with the verdict. With those amazing scenes on television of the black people cheering and even taunting white people who were shocked and stunned.
Right.
And that started something. That awoken something in me. And I suppose the terminus of this was Trayvon Martin.
Right.
I just threw out all the vestiges of my liberalism with the Trayvon Martin case. And it just... it became a commonplace. It's just like Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities. Oh, well, the honor student, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and what counts as an honor student? And then the pictures come out posing with the wads of money, posing with the 40s, posing with the Glocks.
Right.
All this stuff. And honor student, huh? Yeah, I bet this fellow was going to make a great contribution to society.
Right, like with Trayvon. Of course, there's the 15-year-old Trayvon picture that we got. And they even dug this one up years later. I think it was on the anniversary. They dug up one. Here's Trayvon at space camp, and he looks like an okay guy. He's smiling. What are these people up to? I mean,
I wondered if you noticed this, that around the time of the Trayvon Martin case, you would have these newspaper stories on the web that were referring to heinous acts committed by, quote, youths.
Right.
And then you'd notice in the comm boxes that people were saying, yes, those youths. Yeah. Oh, it's remarkable what those youths get up
quote,
to
unquote,
in America these days.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after Obama made his famous intervention, where he said, if I had a son, he would be like, Trayvon.
Yes.
Then you saw this phenomenon of after these heinous acts committed by the youths, these commenters would say, oh, another one of Obama's sons.
Right.
Did you notice that?
Well, yeah. Trayvon was, each one of these things comes, pushes a little farther, stretches that thin membrane between us and reality, between speaking it out loud and just ignoring it. It just gets harder and harder. Michael Brown. But I'm astounded at how
I was going to mention about Michael Brown. Now, you talked about the Trayvon. There were a couple of pictures of Trayvon where he looked quite sweet, right?
Right.
But this picture that they show of Michael Brown in his graduation gown, where he has the most murderous look on his face imaginable, and I think that's the picture you're going to go with?
That's the best they could get.
Yeah.
And he's wasted. Apparently, he's been smoking pot all afternoon on, in this August occasion of his graduation, right? Yeah, it's so funny. But, there just gets less and less plausibility. And, of course, they get shriller and more brutal, they being the powers that be who enforce this convention, because it's less and less, plausible.
Well, that I noticed this idea of people pointing out certain facts about black behavior in the United States, racist. And I used to couch the things that I said or the things that I wrote, perhaps even the things that I thought, based on this fear of being called a racist. And then, I don't know, roughly around the Trayvon time, I thought, I don't care anymore. I really don't care.
Right. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. You asked this question, when did you become woke? I was woke the whole time. I didn't know it. I mean, the question is, when did I develop the courage to think? I mean, there's two stages, right? When did I develop the courage to think clearly about it? And then the courage to speak openly about it, to think it. Gosh, I mean, these things happen and you realize I've known them. It's not like Michael Brown happens and some person thinks, wow, black people really are out of control out there. What he thinks is, shit, I've known this the whole time and I can no longer, kid myself. I think, for me, I always wanted to be part of, we all wanted to be part of the liberal, conventional, respectable world, and this was the civic religion that was demanded of us was to believe this nonsense. So we at least pretended to. And that's just wearing away. And here's what's happening is now that they've brought us to this place. I mean, there's an element of betrayal in all this, isn't there, Kevin? I mean, when we entered into the civil rights movement, it was, okay, black people, we're bringing you into this world of ours. We're bringing you in as full citizens in the United States, Canada.
Full partners, finally as full partners.
But we don't, and, back then you could actually imply as much, but, you guys aren't used to this. This is new for you. You're going to keep up your end of the bargain. You're going to.
So I have to interrupt here to say that you started blogging.
Right.
And for a while there, you were contributing to the American Conservative, were you
Right.
not?
Yes.
And then something happened. Could you tell us
Right.
about that?
Yeah. Well, it's been about 4 or 5 years. I wrote this, what I thought was one of my better little, when I would contribute, I didn't have the right idea of it, American Conservative. Those poor bastards had no idea. I don't know why they let me contribute to their blog, but I threw something up on the blog there, about 1,000, 1,200 words, about flash mobs. Flash mobs, we were only becoming aware of them like 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, Colin Flaherty might have been the only guy out there covering it at the time. So I wrote what I thought was a pretty good piece just about what was going on, that these flash mobs are out there and nobody's talking about it. And of course, I posted it and they pulled it down. And then I thought it was a technical thing. I posted it twice and they pulled it down again. And so I didn't even ask why they're doing it. I just shuffled off, which is my way. But I should have challenged somebody
But
over
you,
it.
as I recall, you had written something to the effect of, we're always talking about our obligations to black people,
Right.
but we never talk about their obligations to us.
Exactly. I think I closed it with, maybe this is what killed it, which is something I've become convinced of. It isn't that white America is failing black America. It's that black America is failing white America. And that's, you look at it, it used to be, it was really unfair for black people in this country because they were expected to be like white people. They were expected to emulate our ways, right? And it must have been a huge strain because it's not their ways and it's not the way they want to live, Now that they've established this cultural hegemony over us, they have, now you've got a bunch of white people trying to be black people. It used to be black people failing and being inferior whites. And now what you have are white people failing as inferior blacks. I just think it's awful.
Well, this phenomenon of, I'll just say, when I was growing up, my mother told me this word nigger was a word that you simply didn't use ever. And
Right.
It was not a word that respectable people ever used.
Right.
And it's not a word that I had much experience with growing up. I'll just say my experience growing up was a lot different than yours because until the age of 15, when I moved to the East End of Vancouver, I had no experience with racial diversity at all. And by racial diversity, in my case, I meant I went to this high school, Vancouver Technical, which was heavily Chinese and Italians.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, all the schools I'd been at, everyone was just like me. I'm not a WASP, but, I'm assimilated Irish, right? So they were all WASPs or assimilated Irish or assimilated French Canadian or whatever. And that level of racial difference was shocking to me. But, your experience was obviously different in that regard.
I think back, and my memory, it seemed like we were evenly split between Mexican and white kids. But I remember recently going back and looking up Norwalk on Wikipedia for something or other, and looking at the racial composition, and it was about 70-30 white and Hispanic. Now that's flipped, and it's 70-30 Hispanic white. And when I was there, when I was growing up, the people intermarried, they assimilated. There were groups, like in my old high school, there were like the typical groups of the time. There were the stoner delinquents. There were the surfer kids, because we're in Southern California. There were the cholos, the gangbangers. And then there was the mass of regular kids who didn't really fit in anywhere. But among those groups, only the cholos were the racially exclusive group. And even among them, you would find the occasional white guy. But, we hung out, and it wasn't a big deal. But as those numbers change, you
didn't hear a lot about Aztlan when you were in school?
No, but there was that Mecca. Is it Mecca? Yeah. That was
Mecha.
going on.
Yeah.
Mecha. And people would come out of class to go to Mecha, right? Like, Jose here. Oh, Jose doesn't have to do English today. He's got Mecha. And we had no idea what was going on there, but apparently they were teaching him all that Aztlan bullshit. Yeah, occasionally something would erupt,
Well, I was going to say that I kind of lost the thread there.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so there's this word nigger that, we just don't use, right? And that's the legacy of the bad old days. And then rap music comes around and it becomes very popular, and all of these songs are nigga, 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 nigga. And the way, nigga please, the way that they're talking. And I'm thinking at the same time, oh my God, this word cannot be said because black men and women will be reduced to violence or to sobbing uncontrollably. And I thought, now wait a minute. They hear this word like 150 times a day. They really expect us to believe that? And we're not even allowed to say the word nigger anymore. It has to be the N-word. And even saying the N-word, you're kind of pushing the boat out there. Should you really be talking about this at all?
Oh, that's funny you should mention that. There years ago, Jennifer Lopez got in trouble for using the word nigga in a rap, And, oh, God, this guy on Good Morning Today, Matt Lauer, he has to ask her about it. And you can see him creeping up on the question with trepidation. And he says to her, you said in a song, excuse me, the N-word. So he said the excuse me, the preface, excuse me, and his voice got all, tender, the N-word. Like just saying, it's like Yahweh or something.
It's exactly like Yahweh.
It's insane.
It is so holy that we can't mention it.
Yeah, and even saying N-word, you get a little, oh gosh, should I? Yeah, I mean, stuff like this is why I just make no more pretense about being liberal about this, whatever that means.
In the last few years, we've seen this, to me, rather astonishing rise of open black separatism.
Yeah.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, Black Lives Matter.
Right.
At the same time, we've had the ramping up of white privilege. And is there any way that we can, what can we do? I mean, this original sin of slavery, it cannot be expunged like the original sin. And I'm thinking, it's like, I suppose I overquote James Burnham on this podcast, but as he famously said, if there's no solution, there's no problem.
Right. Yeah, well, there is no problem in their eyes either. I mean, it's a problem for us because many of us will die and die off and we won't have kids. But that's not a problem. That's just to the elite. That's just history churning through its fodder, which is humanity. You know what I mean? I've been reading about the railroad, the railroads in the United States recently. And it's just the same stuff. I mean, these guys, progress, they get this idea of progress. And it's one thing for progress to be material progress. The railroads, obviously, all those people got screwed over in the making of the railroads. There was something tangible at the end of that, right? The United States. What tangible is at the end of this nonsense?
I'll just point out that Abraham Lincoln, the great friend of the common man, was a railroad lawyer.
Right. I didn't realize that. So your present day elite, they're full of shit.
When did you come to the conclusion? I'll just preface it by saying that after the 2004 election, I kind of had a presentiment of Trump. Because I thought, imagine that you were white working class and you had the choice of voting for George W. Bush or John Kerry. Why would you want to vote for either of them?
Right.
When did it occur to you that the elite of both parties and of the right and the left hated you for what you are and there's nothing that you can do about it?
Well, there's no single moment. It's just like the whole thing with waking. There were these little moments that come like pinpricks or like little tears. And, there are 1,000 little moments. I mean, I think Bill Clinton sealed it for me. Bill Clinton went on this absurd second term tour. Remember the race talk he was going to give us? Where he thought he was, and it went horribly. People were already done with this nonsense. But he went out there and tried to chastise us that this was going to be his big legacy. I didn't know yet that they hated me outright. I just, I've been buying into their nonsense the whole time. And then you get to stuff like the LA riots. The LA riots was a huge tear for a lot of us because so many people on that left liberal, supposedly liberal side were just willing to put up with anything. There was nothing the black people in South Central were going to do to make them change their minds, to make them stop condemning me. So I really don't know. Again, it's less when I come to these realizations, like, oh my God, we really are different, and it really is. I feel this alien chasm between me and black people, and they just keep trying to obscure it in culture. You know what I mean? And anyway, I'm rambling.
Well,
Sorry.
no, I mean, let's look at this question of appropriation.
Right.
I mean, you know that I love music. I love popular music. I love old black music. And I remember when these guys like Jimi Hendrix and Arthur Lee of Love started to play rock music, and the white attitude was, yeah, come on in,
Right.
the water's fine. Isn't this great?
Right.
And, let alone, considerations of, well, who invented the guitar and the electric guitar?
Sure.
And who invented those amplifiers that you're using and those synthesizers
Yeah.
that you're using? But, yeah, I'm not really interested in twerking. I find it disgusting,
Right.
but apparently white people are trying to steal that from you as well.
That's the reality of modern America. White people as inferior black people. And I don't see that it ends very well.
But, I mean, you can't, this business about Bill Clinton being the first black president. Who was it that
Right.
said it? Some black writer? Was it Toni Morrison?
Probably. Sounds right.
I mean, black people don't really buy that.
They don't buy it. Well, then, thing about black America is they don't look at words the way we look at words, right? The white European norm, even though it's not held as tightly as it should be, perhaps, but our goal with speaking, of course, is to find the objective truth and communicate it. And obviously, with black people, it's to communicate your feelings with style or force, as far as I can tell.
Black people tend to use words as a form of incantation.
Yeah.
That you will see this in any of these Black Lives Matters protests where they're getting it into people. And they will often fixate on a phrase like no justice, no peace.
Right.
When someone's trying to argue with them, they say no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. It's like, you're not understanding me. And the white person is thinking, yes, I heard your words and I know what they mean. Is that the total of your argument?
I don't like to get too far out into this kind of theorizing because I don't know really what I'm talking about. But then again, I view the way black people communicate as of a part with the way they make music. You think about like jazz, which is all about syncopation and interrupting the melody and stuff. And they kind of think like that and debate like that, where it's not, you're moving along and then they just got to upset things just to do it. And I used to think, or maybe it is, there's a little insecurity there for a black person. Our insecurity on our side is we might anger this black person and be attacked or called a racist. On their side, there's another thing that they're still laboring under this image of white people as being so much smarter than them. They still know, to the extent they're aware, this is a white world created by white people. This is a tremendous humiliation, a humiliation to people who don't take humiliation well, a humiliation to people who really are all about dominating and humiliating others. This is pretty severe.
Well, it's a difference between a shame culture and a guilt culture.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, but there seems to have been a change in, how would I say, the sensitivity level of black people in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
You familiar with that film, Gimme Shelter, about Altamont?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's a great scene in it. It may be an outtake, but it's in there on the DVD anyway. When the Stones are in Muscle Shoals and Mick Jagger and Tina Turner are sitting next to each other on chairs, and Mick is very excited because he's written this new song called Brown Sugar, and he's playing it to her on the guitar, and she thinks this is great.
Right.
And
yeah, now you can record
it's been quite a long time before, since something like that would be acceptable.
Well, the higher sensitivity now, right? And it's on an individual level. This is, gosh, I hate, it sounds like a crank, but there's impossible to speak the truth now without sounding like a crank. But we are in this black rule. What's the phrase that somebody out there, Kersey?
Paul Kersey, BRA, Black Run America.
Right. And it does, and he's got it right. It doesn't mean that black people are running things, because it's still smart wasps and Jews doing the real work, but it's run on their behalf.
Ostensibly on their behalf.
Right. But anyway, there's this feeling, and it's out there. The individual black person, feels, he runs things. It really is. They feel that they've inverted things, right? We used to run things, but now they do. And it reminds me of in old Greece, there was a group that ran Athens or something for a while before the Republic. The Penthalids. Here I am pushing the boat out too far because somebody knows this will correct me, but a group called the Penthalids, a family that ran, one of these policies for a while. They simply resorted to carrying clubs about because they ran things and there was no law for them. And when they would see people they didn't like, they would just go over and club them, This is the attitude that black people have taken up. I mean, that's what this knockout game is about, right? And it's about respect. I mean, there was a giant black dude knocked out, sucker punched some old white dude and knocked him down and killed him. And then went to Facebook to humble brag, right? To pretend he felt bad about it. But the whole point was to brag that, I knocked this guy out with one punch. But the whole thing about it was he was angry about being disrespected. The guy bumped his wife and didn't say, excuse me, genuinely enough or something. It was all about disrespect. It's always about disrespect. And
well, there was the rape case where some black athlete said that this was payback for 400 years of slavery.
Yeah.
But what do you think? What do you think that black people think when they watch television and it's full of black computer hackers, or on Breaking Bad, the black oncologist?
Yeah, my favorite. Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think they make of that? I mean, particularly if they live in the inner city.
Well, it's the Dunning-Kruger problem, is that the ones who are too stupid, the vast portion of them that are just too stupid to get it, think, either that real world exists out there and they're being denied, their entry into it, or, well, they think it exists. And then they also believe, on the other hand, the craziness about Trayvon. They're hunting us in the streets. So on one hand, there's this great world where the black elites are saving the world. And on the other hand, there's this reality where these horrible racist cops are keeping them down, presumably so they can't go out and save the world. I think it's produced exactly what we have. Like I said, it's all about respect. It's about these guys expect on the street that you would, it's like black guys in the old South had to doff their cap to white men. And they want us to doff our caps now, basically what it is.
Do you know that comedian Bill Burr?
I know the name. I don't think I've ever seen him.
He's like this working class Irish American guy from Boston. And he does this bit where he's talking about owning a pit bull. And he talks about how he realized that he noticed that when he was out walking his dog, that people would actually move from one side of the street to avoid them. Sure. And he said, I hear black people talk about how this offends them. And he says, I don't believe them.
Right.
He said, when I'm walking my pit bull, I feel like the king of the world.
Exactly. And the only reason that black people still, at least the political types, they'll still make this complaint, oh my gosh, you're afraid of us. It's because that, of course, is part of the source of that dominance, right? That feeds into the narratomatic and comes back out the other end as political power,
So, I was thinking about that documentary about basketball that everyone was carrying on about a few years ago.
Hoop Dreams. I never saw it.
Hoop Dreams.
Right.
Well, the thing that I find so strange about this is that apparently it's our fault that black people think that they're going to become NBA stars. I mean, how many teams are there in the NBA? I don't know, but it's 30 or fewer?
Right.
And there's there's 12 men on a basketball team, right?
Right. So they're like 100 professional NBA guys playing at any given moment, right?
Yeah. Well, in the entire league, right? There's 12 times 30 or equivalent.
Right.
That's pretty simple arithmetic. But we're talking about something else here. That you led me to believe that I was going to be an NBA star. I didn't do that. Who's doing that? That would be crazy,
right?
Or this idea that when he was a good boy. He didn't do nothing. He was turning his life around. He made a mixtape. Do you know how many mixtapes are made every single day in America?
Yeah. All those invaluable mixtapes out there. What will become of them? Right?
You know, there's only 100 spots on the Billboard Top 100, and after you get out of the top 20, even those records aren't selling very much.
Well, here's the cynical view. You know, black people are talented at music and sports, and they're not going to produce a lot of professionals in any other areas, in almost any other area. And they're using their strengths. Black people are presently using their strengths very effectively. They've established cultural hegemony. I mean, we're all pretending to be black out here, you know. I mean, they're changing norms. This whole Black Lives thing is, to my mind, even though Black Lives Matter to people don't understand it, because they're a bunch of kids. But what it really is a black autonomy movement. We want our norms, you know, and we're not going to have black cops coming in the city every time someone gets a little beat down, you know. White people might think that's a big deal, but we don't, you know. And that's really what this is. And they're succeeding, right? They're establishing, the cops are backing off, and they've got higher crime. And there's all these decent black people locked up in there who don't have any
prisoners in their neighborhoods. But we had this phenomenon during the election, during the debates, when Trump was real talking about the situation in the inner city, and the reaction from Hillary and the MSM was, "How dare you? Don't you know about Howard University, whatever?" And I was thinking, haven't you seen David Simon's highly acclaimed The Wire?
Right.
Weren't you sane people ordering us to watch that a few years ago so you would understand just how horrifying life in the inner city is?
Yeah.
And I did watch it, and I was impressed. I mean, there's this liberalism in it, you know, that nonsense about, I'm going to sneak in math in the guise of gambling. So now you're all interested in math, right?
And he's, oh my God, right.
Yeah, but I mean, just the, you know, what impressed me about that show was the utter hopelessness.
Right. They had one character there. Everybody loves the guy, you know, the tall, cool guy that everybody likes, you know, Idris Elba or whatever. Everybody loved his character, but my favorite character in them was this guy, Prop Joe, because he was this guy who was, he was just trying to make it a neighborhood, right? He lived in the house that his uncle had bought, the first black guy in this neighborhood or something, you know, and he was trying to, like, I think, follow the old Italian mobster mentality where it's, we'll do our dirty business, but we'll keep it controlled and try to keep the neighborhood safe from it. You know?
He was involved in setting up communal activities.
Right. You know, but of course, we had an exchange with David Simon. I think you and me. I always love when I get a rise. It's pathetic, but I love to get a rise out of anybody who's like that, you know. But we pissed him off, if you recall, about teasing him about the show. And that's the thing, is these shows get out of their control, right? David Simon put all this amazing work into this show. It's 5 seasons, right? And arguably one of the best shows ever on television. And he thinks he's really got his message out there. But all of us are watching it, and we're thinking, yeah, man, black people in Baltimore are fucking out of control, you know?
No, I was thinking about that, you know. Well, of course, I'd been to Baltimore. I went there basically because I wanted to see Edgar Allan Poe's grave. I'll just tell you this story. It's kind of short. That his grave is not very far from the Squid Port, you know, as I call it. And I'm walking along the street, and I noticed that there's less and less activity, and everything seems abandoned, and it's getting sketchier and sketchier. And I'm beginning to think, boy, I sure hope this gravesite is coming up real soon now, because I don't want to spend 1 minute more here than I have to.
So here you are literally hoping for the grave, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I was just thinking that one of the things that you hear these things, you know, people have these romantic ideas about Baltimore, right? And then they watch The Wire and they think, well, I learned one thing from The Wire. Right. Oh, what was it? I'm sure as hell never living in Baltimore.
Right.
I mean, you hear these incredible things about Baltimore, like this. There's something like 10 or 12% of the population of the city, it's heroin addicts.
Really? I had no idea. Yeah, it's among the worst. Detroit might be the only one that's the only inner city that's in worse shape. And it really is, you know, this is another thing that's becoming a cliche, but it's probably true, is that affirmative action is just drawing up whatever talent is out there, is drawing them right out of Baltimore. In fact, they're going right down the street to D.C., right? And it's leaving behind the guys, people who can least take care of themselves, and they're stuck in there with the worst sort of criminals.
Let's talk about the rise of the alt-right. When did you first notice this stirring?
I Twitter, I had kind of checked out over the past 4 years. Really feel bad, but I really was just barely keeping track of things. But then I discovered Twitter. I had an account forever, but like 2 years ago, I started going on Twitter, and then I started running into guys like Ricky Vaughn and Jared Taylor Swift and these other fellows. And I realized, wow, there's this whole world out here. It was pretty exhilarating. But, I've been alt-right the whole time. You and I have had conversations where we saw this stuff coming. I wish I had written about it. We should have written it down. But there are things that we were talking about 5 or 6 years ago, like.
Oh, even before that.
This nonsense.
But sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me of that Tom Wolfe illustrated essay, "The Man Who Was Right Too Soon."
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to be in that position.
Right. We talked about this idea that Democrats are the real racists was silly nonsense. The idea that racism is a real problem rather than a weird kind of hoax, that we talked about that. You could see all this coming. Maybe lots of us saw it coming the whole time, and that's what's happening. But
I think the difference is that no one thought that it would ever be organized in any way.
Yeah, Trump has just lit the fuse, To me, Trump has been a series of heroic acts, beginning with, the one thing that pissed them off the most when he threw down the gauntlet on immigration, and he did it with a, typically combative, supposedly crude statement about rapists and murderers, which was, it's all very true, by the way. Mexico wants, its poorest half to go here. And of course, among those are going to be rapists and murderers. They're not sending lawyers and if sailors pointed this out. In Mexico, if you're a professional, it's a pretty good deal. Then they tend to stay in Mexico. Whereas, in most other countries, the professionals want to come here too. So Mexico has a very unique sort of arrangement.
Well, Mexico is a screwed up country. It's so difficult to explain this. Steve Staler talks about it. You've had these Mexican TV stations, right?
Right.
The networks, and you look at their shows. How come there's all these tall blonde women?
Right.
Where do they come from? But I knew a little bit about this before. There's 10% of Mexico. There's this conquistador, American elite,
right,
as Sailor calls them, that runs the country. And they are determined, and they've been very successful at keeping the Indians down.
Right.
I read this book by the English author Patrick Marnham. It's called So Far From God, and it's about Mexico and Central America. You remember this fellow Porfirio Diaz?
Right.
He famously said, "Poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States."
Yeah.
At the time that he wrote this, there was not a single memorial to Cortez in all of Mexico.
Right.
And Cortez, for better or worse, is the father of Mexico as we know it. And this woman, his mistress, the woman who bore him child, at least one child, her name, I can't pronounce it. It's Malinche or Malinche. She is universally recognized as the great demon figure.
Oh, wow.
In the history of Mexico, the mother of the cataclysm. And I'm thinking, if it weren't for the Spaniards, it wouldn't be what we're talking about now. Yeah. This is how alienated they are from their own reality.
Yeah, Mexicans are a special case, I think, too. They've so completely embraced the Aztec, or, not the Aztec. You always see the Aztecs in these horrible murals that are all over L.A. But, they've embraced the suffering, right? And I don't know what it is, if it's perverted Catholicism.
Prescott in his book, The Conquest of Mexico, which was written, 150 years ago?
Right.
Or more.
Amazing book.
There's a 200-page introduction where he goes into Aztec civilization and talks about the terrible legacy of the Aztecs on Mexico.
Right.
Even it was then in the 1850s,
Right.
this fatalism, this crippling fatalism.
And fatalism you will find individually. And, I know Mexicans. I'm not one of these people who, I don't think poorly of them. I think they're good people. I mean, generally law-abiding people, but they have their things. And one of their things is this dark, sort of death-obsessed kind of view. They really seem to have this idea that nothing really matters in the end. You know what I mean? And this kind of like this shrug that they have, that something that I find kind of appalling. But it's part of it is behind. I mean, you get the occasional, you get these occasional psychopaths. You know what I mean? In the Mexican communities, it's not like in the black ghetto where it's just utter mayhem and the gangs are just, they're so dangerous and so chaotic. But these Mexican gangs are a little more noble, right? At least when I was there, it was more like, in fact, they didn't waste their time picking on people who weren't like them. They spent a lot of their time fighting with each other, right? And like they all decided, we're soldiers. We want a war. And let's be soldiers in our war. And for the most part, they left the civilians out of it, So there's that admirable aspect of it. But there's this horrible acceptance of death, right? That you might see in their stuff like this Day of the Dead ritual.
Viva la muerte.
Which came along recently, which is really hilarious because you get these idiots, Slate magazine kind of mentality where some asshole is going to come in here and tell you about the significance of the Day of the Dead and try to work it into theory and make it sound like more than it is, I was making this complaint to an atheist, some stupid atheist kid. Okay. So you've decided religion's nonsense. You want nothing to do with it. Okay, fine. But here you are on the other side. You're saying, yeah, but Islam. Well, I can't criticize it. Yeah, but the Mexican Santeria and their Day of no. Oh no, I have to just humbly, just sit silently and say. So if you've decided that all of that Western religion was bullshit and you're better off without it, you're just going to take on all these new alien.
I'm looking for the positive spin on Santa Muerte and Jesus Malverde.
Right.
Yeah. Where's the good stuff in there? Because I'm waiting I'm waiting to hear it.
Oh, but people are out there trying. I mean, they're trying to intellectualize voodoo, right? And you could go find some theorist probably at one of your bigger schools who's got a whole thing about how voodoo is, it's not.
And remember that it's spelled VODOU, that you've been spelling it wrong all these years.
I thought it was VUD. Shoot. Well,
no, you see, we've been spelling it wrong.
Damn it. It's just another way that we keep them down.
Well, let's get back to Trump. Of course, I'll say that I'm recording this the day before the election.
Yeah.
And it's going to run after the election. And we don't know whether Trump wins or loses, but God willing, he'll win.
Yes.
But there's a blogger who calls himself Fame's Blonde.
Fame's Blonde.
Who made the argument, if you look at where Trump started last summer and where he is today, that Trump didn't make us. That's the alt-right. We made him. What do you think of that?
I believe it. But you have to give him credit. Again, I talk about that. The first heroic act was making the insult about murderers and rapists. It was sort of the grain of sand around which the pearl that is this campaign is developed. It's just beautiful.
Well, maybe there was a heroic act before that, which was, you said all these terrible things about Rosie O'Donnell. Well, and of course, we expect you to apologize for it. And his response was roughly along the lines of, no, I'm not going to apologize for it. This is a horrible, unpleasant woman. And all these people are listening to him and thinking, yes, he's saying what we're thinking.
Right. There's no controversy there. We all know that Rosie O'Donnell's an unattractive person. But like guys like Scott Adams, who's done some great work, right? I think they put too much into the appeal of his peculiar Trump appeal, right? This brash, like almost P.T. Barnum character, right? It's not that so much. It's just he came along so perfectly. It was just he's like a star that aligned because the last half century really has been an increasingly intense, long fuck you white man, right? In the culture.
Well, you mentioned this word. I was speaking to you a couple of days ago, and you mentioned this word gaslighting.
Right. Right. Well, they've been trying to make us think we're crazy this whole time, right? And then we sort of our eyes popped open, and here's this guy saying, screw you. No, screw you. We don't accept any of it. Here's another thing I've been thinking of regarding Trump, too. See, the elite thought they had set in place all these presumptions, all these operating assumptions on which we're all supposed to accept. None of us ever accepted them, really. None of us, when we're going into this civil rights thing, where we're talking about equality, none of us set in for, demographic displacement. None of us signed on for that. This is a betrayal. None of us signed on for BLM. None of us signed on for this systematic searching out of white people in institutions and removing them, right? And deliberately replacing them. None of us signed on for that, And so with Trump, when he came on, he sort of, because he doesn't know any better, from the elite's point of view, he simply doesn't know he's not supposed to say these things. So he says it, and all of a sudden it's like everybody says, wait a minute, we don't have to accept these bullshit assumptions. Wait a minute. We don't have to keep going, down this road into this mist. No. And it just crystallized everything so beautifully.
But the truth has been out there for so long. I mean, we talk about the civil rights movement and this idea of political equality, and that gets you someone like Coleman Young, the mayor of Detroit.
Right.
And the truth about what was happening to Detroit was known for a long time, but the media and the elite's attitude and the attitude of respectable people like I used to be is it's not really, there's nothing to be gained by going into this. And then, of course, you get to Kwame Kilpatrick, right? It's like, we're having hookers murdered because they know too much.
Yeah. And his wife is out there chasing his mistress with, it's crazy. But that's the progression, right? I mean, we used to have these guys who at least made a show of it. Andrew Young in Atlanta, right?
Oh, who was the fellow who was the mayor of Cleveland? Stokes, was it? Carl Stokes?
Oh, Carl, yeah. I vaguely remember this name.
Yeah, and you had the mayor of Baltimore, the fellow who talked about drug legalization.
Right.
Yeah, he was elected in November 1967, Carl Stokes. But, I mean, it's been a tremendous degeneration since then.
Well, there's nothing I can say that that hasn't already been said. I accept all the worst analyses of what's happening, and it's that there's not enough human capital left in a place like Detroit for it to be run,
Doesn't
like a normal city.
Surprise you, or maybe I'm wrong? I'll ask you another way. Does it surprise you that Detroit is this festering madhouse, and our attitude is that let's not talk about Detroit. Let's just not talk about Detroit ever.
No, I mean, that's what we are, right? Detroit is that's the worst end of it, right?
Well, you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who stop paying their water bills.
Right.
Well, you understand if you stop paying your water bills, you won't have water anymore, right?
Well, yeah, and then if the water company tries to shut people's water off, it's racism, probably, right?
Yes.
But, yeah, it surprises me that nobody wants to do anything about it, apparently. You know what I mean? I think that the Democratic Party would at least stop, they do plenty in secret, as we see, just once in one of these emails, I'd like to see one of them asking the other, golly, I understand we have to maintain this ruse regarding Detroit and Baltimore and why they're fucked up. But can't we just try and do something on the down low to help them to get this out? You know what I mean? If we have to go in there and take it over and just leave a figurehead black mayor in place, let's do that. But let's fucking try and give some relief.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, that's Detroit. And there's Baltimore, which is close to D.C. You've read about the, what do they call it? The WMATA, the Washington Metro system.
Right.
How it has pretty much completely collapsed.
Yeah.
And the workforce, despite the fact that Washington is almost now only about, 50% black, The employees there are, I believe, 97% black, the metro employees. And their subway system has pretty much collapsed. And apart from a brave piece in the Washington Times a few years ago, again, no, let's not talk about this. Do you think that one effect of his candidacy will be that we are going to start talking about these things because it's become an issue of survival?
I think his candidacy, whether deliberate or not, is an attempt to make that happen. I don't see it happening because I think if he's elected, they are going, this isn't over for the elite, right? I mean, if we elect him, they're going to dig in their heels all the more and they're going to become an obstructionist, and it's going to be this bizarre situation, right? It's going to be like it's going to be like the elections never stopped, right? I think they're going to keep hammering away at him, and we're not going to be able to do any small things. We'd be lucky to institute his immigration ideas, just that alone. And all the other bullshit's going to go on, but this is perhaps the beginning of something. That's all I'm thinking.
Well, I don't know whether you know this, but Josh Whedon, who has this enormous fan base, and I barely know what he does, except I don't think I've liked any of it.
Right.
Firefly, all this stuff. Well, he's been making these political ads for the election, and there was this one where Stanley Tucci reads a revised version of The Three Little Pigs.
Oh, God.
Did you know that the Three Little Pigs were xenophobes?
Oh, I think I saw somebody wrote about this.
Because they were, I wrote about it. They were hiding from the world, and they have to come out. So what happens at the end of this little video is all the non-wolf animals get together, and of course, because they're all friends, right? And they come up to the wolf, and they say, "We're on to you, pal, and you're not going to be able to get away with this anymore, and you should really think about becoming a vegan." And I saw this, and I thought, these guys appear far more fearsome than they are because our elite is afflicted with senile dementia.
They are. This is the thing, and about this nonsense with the spirit cooking. It reveals, they're evil, I and all that, but it reveals to me nothing so much as their mediocrity. I'm not impressed with John and what's the other Podesta?
Tony.
I'm not impressed with the Podesta's artwork. I think they have shitty taste, is what it is. And they think, oh, this is so cutting edge and this is a big fuck you to respect that, I think they're full of shit. And I think one of the things revealed in this election is just how weak they are. They've been losing arguments forever, all right? And we know now one of the lessons is no more arguing. Yeah, we have to still make our arguments, but that's not where change is going to occur. Change is going to occur with taking over institutions, action. We need a media outlet, a real media outlet. We need a president would be awesome. We need these things because that's the only way change is going to happen. I tweeted this at Charles Murray. This guy drives me nuts, right? Everybody knows Charles Murray, the remarkable work he's done. He's a never Trumper, and he's one of these guys who just never, ever, ever Trump, and it's all because of they find him gauche, basically, I mean, they've got nothing.
He lives in a village with his Vietnamese wife. He lives in a village, and I think it's only something like about 1,200 people, 1,500 people, something like that, with a stratospherically high income level.
Of course.
And it's about 98% white.
Right.
But sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's, I mean, a lot of these guys live like this.
What did you tweet? You responded to something that he'd said?
Oh, yeah, him and Christina Hoff Sommers, right? And they're here they are. What did I tweet at him? I just tweeted to him, you've been winning these arguments for about 30 years now, politely destroying their arguments. What's happened? They have marched on. They've rolled right over you. And now you're going to tell me, oh, you can't vote Trump because he's saying mean things. You people are crazy. Where are our friends, right? In the intelligentsia, we have very few people, though I suspect a lot of them will come out. Like
in the absence of an alternative elite, it appears that we're going to do this backwards, that we're going to have a leader first and the infrastructure will follow.
Well, and it's almost we live in this inverted world. We have an elite that believes or professes to believe nonsense, right? The blank slate ideas and all their horseshit ideas. We have an elite that appears to be superstitious and engage in bizarre superstitious rituals, right? And we have a common mass out here that is saying sensible things. And we're all out here saying, you know what? Fucking stop dumping immigration on us. It's a stupid idea. You know what? All this nonsense about BLM, maybe it's not true. Maybe the reality is just the reality we see, and all your theory is a lot of nonsense. I mean, it's inverted in that the common man is the voice of reason, and the elite are a bunch of lunatics, a bunch of hotheads. That's the way I view it.
Well, on that hopeful note, we're going to wrap this up. Thanks so much, Dennis. I hope we can do it again. And I'll just sign off with the salutation, stay frosty.
Thank you. You too, sir. Thanks a lot.
That ends episode 62 of Grace and Steel, part 1 of the conversation with Dennis Dale. I'm Kevin Steele, and on behalf of myself and my co-host, Kevin Michael Grace, thanks for listening. And be sure to check out episode 63, which is part 2 of this conversation with Dennis Dale. It's subtitled Busted in Portland, and therein he describes getting rounded up with the riffraff protesting Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election.